Okay, great. I think we're ready to go here. Great. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and we're also going to be saving the chat following this meeting. Good morning. My name is Rob Willis, and I use the pronoun he, him. I'm today's moderator facilitator, and along with my colleague Janelle, we are the contractor supporting EPA and the U.S. Army Corps on these roundtables. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me or to Janelle if there's anything we can do to support your participation. I'm going to kick it over to Novice Bermudez, EPA's Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Office of Water, to convene the meeting, and then she'll hand it off to the U.S. Army Corps, and then Jamie, I'll come to you for opening remarks as well. Novice, please take it away.
Thanks, Rob, and thank you, everyone, and hello, and thanks for taking the time to join us today for this important regional roundtable on the implementation of waters of the United States. This is our first West-focused roundtable, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the conversation. As Rob mentioned, my name is Novice Bermudez, and I'm one of the Deputy Assistant Administrators for EPA's Office of Water. As many of y'all know, this year we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. And this milestone offers us an opportunity to take stock of the incredible progress we've made over the past 50 years. It's also a great time to assess ways we can sustain that progress moving forward. While rivers in this country no longer catch fire, new challenges continue to emerge, and there are some old challenges that have persisted through the years. Waters of the United States remains a critical issue. The definition of waters of the United States is fundamental to the Clean Water Act and central to continuing to ensure clean and safe water that we all rely on. Given the importance and high level of interest in this topic, EPA and the Army have committed to conducting extensive outreach with stakeholders and our co-regulators. The fact is, our country's water resources are incredibly diverse, as are the experiences and perspectives of those who are affected by the application of this term on the ground. So it's important that the agencies understand those experiences and perspectives. Today's roundtable and the other 9 that have happened or will be happening are one part of this effort. Rather than talking at you, our goal for today is to hear from y'all. This is why we've asked you to choose the discussion topics y'all want to focus on for today's roundtable. This has been our approach for these roundtables because we fully recognize that different regions have different concerns, and we want to get a better sense of what those different concerns might be. One thing I should note here is that last fall, we proposed a rule about the definition of waters of the United States. The public comment period on that proposed rule closed on February 7th, and we are reviewing the comments that we received. Although we can't consider any new information provided here today as part of that process, we look forward to hearing your feedback and experiences with how we have implemented the term so that we can do a better job of making sure we all have access to clean water moving forward. I want to thank all of you, especially the people at California Farm Bureau, not only for taking the time to develop a well thought out and diverse nomination, but for helping develop the agenda and for being here today. I know it wasn't easy for y'all to coordinate everyone. I have no doubt this will be an incredibly valuable conversation. So for the sake of time, I'm now going to turn it over to Jamie Pinkham, who is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army Civil Works, to say a few words. Jamie?
Thank you, Novice. So this is Stacy Jensen from Army Civil Works on behalf of Assistant Secretary Connor and Principal Deputy Jamie Pinkham. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I'm the Assistant for Regulatory and Tribal Affairs for the Assistant Secretary, and our office provides oversight and policy direction for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works Program. And the Army recognizes the importance and value of our nation's waters, and we join EPA in this effort to hear from you and understand your experiences and perspectives related to the definition of waters of the United States. The Army is particularly interested in gaining a better understanding of ways to ensure implementation of the definition of waters of the United States is clear and with the appropriate level of consideration for regional differences. In addition, we're interested in understanding any tools that may exist that may help with better implementing the definition. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is one of the primary agents of Clean Water Act implementation, as they engage with the co-regulators of tribes, states, and local governments, as well as landowners and stakeholders on a daily basis. As a result, we know firsthand how important open communication is to implementing the Clean Water Act. And we look forward to hearing your input on the topics you've chosen for today's roundtable. Thank you.
Take it away, Jamie.
Good morning. My name is Jamie Johansson, and I am the president of the California Farm Bureau. California Farm Bureau is California's largest farm organization, comprised of 53 county farm bureaus representing approximately 31,000 members across 56 counties. Our members are farmers and ranchers who produce a reliable, safe, and affordable food supply through responsible stewardship of our natural resources. I'm also a first-generation farmer growing olives and citrus fruit up in Oroville, California, about an hour north of Sacramento. And I just want to thank you for joining today's Waters of the United States Roundtable, focusing on the Western region, which for the purpose of these roundtables is comprised of Alaska, California, Hawaii, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, and Wyoming. In the last 7 years, stakeholders have grappled with 3 different definitions of the waters of the U.S., including the pre-2015 regulatory regime and the 2015 Clean Water Rule, and finally the 2020 Navigable Waters Protection Rule. The western region of the United States is distinctive in many ways, from its soaring mountains and expansive prairies to its red rock canyons and flat top buttes, to transitional areas between valley floors and surrounding low foothills. Additionally, the West is home to a large percentage of the nation's federally managed public lands. California, for example, is close to 50% publicly owned. We know that the scope of jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act is of fundamental importance to many categories of stakeholders, many of them represented on the roundtable today. Led by the California Farm Bureau, today's roundtable is collaboratively assembled in conjunction with our fellow state Farm Bureau organizations in the Western states previously mentioned. As organizations representing stakeholders struggling to navigate with this ongoing regulatory pendulum, we believe it has never been more important to discuss the impact of these regulations, evaluate the regional vulnerability of water resources, and explore key implementation issues stakeholders in the Western geographic region have faced under the varying definitions of waters of the U.S. Thank you and welcome.
Great, Jamie, thank you. So I'm going to spend the next 3 minutes talking to folks about how we plan to use the Zoom interface today. Whoops, there it is. I want to recognize that virtual meetings, that they present an indescribable number of ways for things to go sideways. So if you start talking while on mute, you're unmuted and something happens, dog barking in the background, or you have to switch to the phone because you've got a student presentation you have to go to, no big deal. We've all experienced that and it's totally okay. That being said, we are striving to minimize distractions as much as we can. And so I ask folks to keep their lines on mute when speaking. You can access all of the meeting controls using the Zoom meeting panel. There's a picture of the Zoom meeting panel up there on the screen. Yours may look a little bit different depending on how you came into the meeting, but the icons should remain the same. So to mute and unmute your line, you hit that old time looking microphone labeled number 1. When you press that button, a red line will appear and that will indicate to you that you are on mute. The second icon, label number 2, is the video on and off button. You all seem to have that one nailed down, as most of you all are on video, and I appreciate that very much. Pressing that button will toggle the video on and off. Third icon is the participants button. You press that, it opens up a dialog box, and you can see everyone who is in the meeting. Box number 4 there, item number 4 there, is the chat. If you press that chat, another dialog box will open. And it will allow you to chat to one another or chat to us. I want to flag Janelle Roberts in that chat. She's my colleague. If you're having any issues or if there's anything that we can do to support your participation, don't hesitate to give Janelle and drop Janelle a quick chat. The next button is the live transcript button. I've enabled English captions on the call should you desire it. You can press that live transcript button and hit show subtitles. If you have subtitles showing and you want to get rid of them, you can hit that same button and press disable subtitles. The last item I want to talk to you about is the raise hand feature. I'm going to ask that you virtually raise your hand to jump into the different parts of the conversation, and here's how you do that. There are 2 ways I want to share with you. The first is the keyboard shortcut. You can hit Alt-Y. If you press Alt-Y, that will raise your hand and lower your hand, and it will signal to me that you want to jump into the conversation. The next way to do that is by pressing the reactions button, which is label number 6 there. You press that, a little menu will come up and you can press raise hand. One last item, and that's primarily to help us with meeting documentation and with facilitation, is I'm requesting that if you haven't already, that you rename yourself in Zoom. To do that, you press that participant box that will open up the participant list. You find your name in that list, hover your mouse over it. You can press the more button and then rename. Once you hit that rename button, click that rename button, a separate dialog box will appear with a text field. In that text field, I ask that you type your name, your personal pronouns if desired, and your organization, and click OK, and that will rename it so we are all able to see that. I'm going to give folks 15 seconds to do that, and then we're going to jump right into it. Great. Okay, so you might be asking, how are we planning to spend the next 2 hours and 18 minutes together? And that agenda has it up there. We're going to spend 45 minutes at the outset here, going all the way around the phone here in the Zoom, asking everybody to introduce themselves. Into the chat, I'm going to put the order so folks know what order they're going to be coming in. And then we have 2 45-minute discussion blocks. In those discussion blocks, we have 2 or 3 questions for you to reflect on. And I'm not going to be systematically going around the room. In those instances, we're going to be asking folks to raise their hand and jump into the conversation. So that is what our plan is. And I want to move right in. Oops. I want to move right into the introduction. And Jamie, I'm going to ask that you start with an introduction, and I'm going to ask folks to introduce yourself, share some brief opening comments, and please keep that under 3 minutes so that we are able to maintain our time. So Jamie, take it away.
Thank you again, Jamie Johansson, President of the California Farm Bureau. As far as opening thoughts, the definition of the waters of the U.S. is of paramount importance to our members at California Farm Bureau. As I mentioned earlier, 30,000 up and down across the state. Our members who engage in activities on the land waters that are regulated under the Federal Clean Water Act and often require jurisdictional determination from the Army prior to proceeding. In addition to waters that are jurisdictional, a key priority for our members is maintaining the exemptions or exclusions that currently exist in the Clean Water Act, such as exemptions from 404 permits for ongoing, routine, and normal farming practices such as tilling, as well as prior converted croplands, which will be an important discussion point today in that definition. Any changes to Clean Water Act regulations governing how determination of jurisdictions are made, and particularly any expansion of federal jurisdiction, has a substantial effect on farmers' ability to timely obtain the permits necessary to continue existing agricultural operations or develop new or expanded agricultural projects. Changes can also affect a farmer's ability to conduct ordinary agricultural activities such as plowing, planting, and fence building in or near ephemeral drainages, ditches, or low spots that could trigger the Clean Water Act civil or criminal penalties unless a permit is obtained. We also worry about the impacts the proposed rule will have on our members and the ability of farmers and ranchers to continue to utilize their land. Additionally, we are specifically concerned about the deletion of the term navigable and the way a new rule will impact common Western water features such as croplands, ditches, and ephemeral features. California's farmland provides many social and ecosystem benefits beyond a safe and affordable food supply, such as open space, habitat, and carbon sequestration. And the scope of jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act is of fundamental importance to these benefits. It's our view these benefits make it essential that farmers and ranchers have clarity and certainty. We also are particularly concerned about the practical implications that could result in small family-owned businesses needing costly legal and/or consulting expertise to farm ground that is already being thoughtfully and sustainably stewarded. It's my privilege to represent farmers, foresters, and ranchers in the Western region on this roundtable today, and I look forward to today's opportunity to discuss regional specifics of the proposed rule and the implications of implementation on production agriculture. Thanks.
Great. Jamie, thank you. Phyllis, you are up, and then following Phyllis is Katie, and then Todd. Phyllis, please.
Aloha, my name is Phyllis Shimabukuro Geyser. I am the chairperson of the Board of Agriculture and the Department of Agriculture in the state of Hawaii. I'm very honored to be part of this roundtable as a participant. Hawaii is unique with its subtropical environment, limited landmass as an island archipelago, slopey terrains, and our groundwater is the primary water source for our very small farms, and more restrictions of surface water have occurred over time. We have a diversity of specialty crops and probably the most expensive agricultural land values, ranging at around $80,000 per acre. Because of the high cost of land, our small farmers must maximize production of the land. Why is this important to Hawaii? As the most isolated state in the nation, Hawaii relies on imports for approximately 90% of its food. The COVID pandemic has highlighted for everyone on the importance of having sufficient food and other necessities when the supply chains were disrupted. Hawaii recognizes that it must substantially increase local food production in spite of all the current obstacles, especially extraordinarily high cost of inputs. But we need a regulatory framework that does not provide unnecessary impediments to support our farmers and ranchers in our endeavor for increased food security. As California and other Western states do supply much of Hawaii's needs, we support their concerns. Their production must be considered and protected to ensure Hawaii's own food security. Thank you.
Great. Phyllis, thank you. I've got Katie, then Todd, then Jennifer. Katie, please.
My name is Katie Vandenberg Van Vliet, and I am an attorney at Sawtooth Law Offices in Idaho. We practice in many different areas of law at Sawtooth, but our work revolves mostly around agriculture, land use, natural resources, real property, and water law. I was also born and raised on a dairy farm and am the third generation to be involved in my family's dairy and farming operations when I am not practicing law. I'm very proud to be a part of Idaho's agricultural industry, not only because of the hard work this industry does to feed our country and our world, but also because of the efforts they take to be good stewards of the land and our resources. I'm also proud to be a member of this state because of the progressive work that is being done by our agencies in cooperation with our industries to protect our waters. Coming from a lawyer's perspective and also from a stakeholder's perspective, I feel that it is not sustainable for us to continue playing ping pong with the WOTUS rule through rulemaking and legal battles in the courtroom, because it creates regulatory uncertainty for all of those involved. I think that it's time to stop swinging from one extreme definition to another and work together to apply common sense and create a rule that provides regulatory certainty, but does not unreasonably overregulate or interfere with state jurisdiction. I appreciate the opportunity to be on this roundtable today and look forward to the rest of this discussion.
Great, Katie, thank you. Next, I've got Todd, then Jennifer. Todd, please.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity as well to be part of this roundtable. I currently serve as the president of the Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts. I'm a fifth generation cattle and sheep rancher in central Wyoming. I would echo much of what has been said in regards to diversity in waters of the U.S. Certainly Wyoming as a headwaters state is much different than other states. As a representative of conservation districts, we have statutory authority to monitor and help with clean water efforts in our state, as well as other conservation districts across the West. We also assist in landowners participating in Farm Bill programs. As has been said, the ping pong approach to WOTUS is not helpful when it comes to private landowners, small farm, family farms and ranches participating in those programs and doing their day-to-day business. It's obvious that it's needed to have a clear and predictable definition of the roles, those involved, and the definitions of WOTUS itself. I think the Supreme Court decisions that have happened in the past have given some groundwork for what WOTUS should be, and I think we need to stick to a clear definition of what those are. For us in Wyoming and the West, see waters being, again, as I said, much different than other parts of the nation. And we need to focus on what it means for our state and what it means in the West so that we can understand and play our role as far as helping with water for you guys. Thank you.
Todd, thank you. Next in line, I have got Jennifer for introductions, and then Tammy, I have you next. Welcome to the call. Yeah, so Jennifer, take it away.
Great, thank you. So good morning, I'm Jennifer Carr. I'm a Deputy Administrator for the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection, and I have oversight of the Clean Water Act programs that are delegated to Nevada by EPA, as well as the 401 state certification program with the Army Corps of Engineers. I was asked by the Nevada Farm Bureau Federation to be the Nevada representative today, and I hope to convey the uniqueness of Nevada during our discussions in the national picture of WOTUS rulemaking. To set a baseline for understanding, Nevada's definition for waters of the state is broader than any definition of WOTUS. Likewise, anything that's not jurisdictional to EPA or the Corps is still jurisdictional to Nevada. Our permitting programs cover all types of water, including both surface water and groundwater protection. Nevada's geography, topography, and hydrology are unique. We're one of the most mountainous states, or we are the most mountainous state in the Union. And between each north-south mountain range, as you move across Nevada, you see agriculture in every valley bottom. Nevada is also unique in that water can be scarce since we only receive an average of 9 inches of precipitation a year. Agriculture has been a staple of rural Nevadans' existence over 150 years. Outside our population centers in Las Vegas and the greater Reno area, our lands are vast. Towns are spread apart, and sometimes you'll see signs that even warn that you can't find gas again for another 106 miles. Water features are often also separated by many miles of upland topography. Nevada encompasses a large portion of the Great Basin, so much of the water that does fall into our state never makes it to an ocean. In our February 2022 letter on the latest proposed Rule 1, we were clear that the agencies should use whatever time is necessary to work on an effective approach to a more durable and flexible rule for this Rule 1 proposal well before work begins on Rule 2. We went on to say that, quote, this could include creation of strategies to address the distinct differences in hydrologic regimes throughout the country. And other states have said something similar. I do applaud EPA and the Corps for following through on this idea, taking it seriously and taking the time to have these regional roundtables to dig deeper into these concepts. Right now, I would say that one of the fundamental questions is how do we break up the country if this path was able to be followed to a conclusion. I did notice in the discussion on possible tools for evaluating different hydrologic regimes isn't on today's agenda. So just in closing, I will share that I'm also an appointee of the Western States Water Council, and we're working on this issue as well. We have 3 upcoming workshops with our members and federal partners to dig into tools and strategies that depict differences in hydrologic and other environmental regimes across the nation, and the ways the tools can be used for potential separation of the country into regional WOTUS definition areas. These workshops will dig into resources including the USGS National Hydrography Dataset, EPA ecoregions, stream flow duration assessment methods, Army Corps wetland delineation regions, and USDA major land resource areas. And the culmination of this effort is envisioned to be a white paper that will further inform the discussion and create a common baseline of information on classification schemes. So with that, I will yield the floor, and I want to thank you again for doing what we're doing, and I look forward to the discussion.
Jennifer, thank you. Next, I have Tammy, then Brenda, then Dan. Tammy, please jump in.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tammy Johnson. I'm the Executive Director of the Montana Mining Association. Pleased to be here today. I guess I would begin our comments by saying that we've been engaged on this issue since 2014. We still feel, as we did then, that clarity and predictability are just super important. And I'm afraid that some of the ways that Some of this is defined in the various waters that are being contemplated. It just is a little unclear of exactly what it is. And we certainly are a business in Montana. It's very important to Montana's economy, but we thrive on predictability and clarity. We have no problems meeting environmental regulation, laws, etc. We just need to understand exactly what they are. So that's something that we are really looking for as this process proceeds. Our members engage in activities on land and water that do require jurisdictional determination from the Corps before proceeding, and changes in the Clean Water Act regulations as it pertains to waters of the U.S. could really change the scope of federal jurisdiction that would have a substantial effect on our members' ability to finance, develop new projects, or to even maintain their existing infrastructure and facilities. And that certainly concerns our members. I also think that the state of Montana, and I'm not going to go deeply into this because I know Director Castor is on the call and this is probably more in her bailiwick, but Montana has very stringent water quality, water quantity protection acts. The state has memorandums of understanding with our federal agencies, particularly on the DEQ side, to deal with that when it comes to permitting actions, etc. I think that this overlay by EPA would complicate what is state-owned waters and the permitting systems and the protections that we have in place in the state of Montana. I suppose the next thing that, you know, when you have words where you're talking about interstate waters, kind of in the same status as traditional navigable waters, and the lack of some real clear definitions in there gives us pause. Certain features to be considered jurisdictional based on their relationships to some of the other type of constructs that we have within our mine site location, I think is going to be a problem. It really comes down to this, and I won't waste any more time talking about this, but when it's subjective terms, allowing somebody to make a case-by-case decision, it becomes very difficult to conduct the business of mining and or be able to do what needs to be done and not have to change. I mean, one of the big things is change something substantial following promulgation of these rules, etc. That is going to be very difficult based on our landscape and what is within our permitted boundary. So again, we would prefer no ambiguity, no uncertainty, closely defined terms, and not being subjective. So with that, I'll close for now. Thank you.
Tammy, thank you. I've got Brenda, Dan, then Jeff. Brenda, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to share thoughts on the waters of the United States. My name is Brenda Richards, and I serve as the director for the Idaho Rangeland Conservation Partnership, which is a nonprofit, non-dues-based organization bringing together diverse rangeland stakeholders to support locally led collaboratives and also assist in facilitating exchanges with stakeholders, building partnerships, and to help development and implement solutions on issues affecting rangelands and the communities dependent upon them. Our membership includes landowners, private, state and federal agencies, elected officials, conservation, recreation, and other stakeholders such as the Idaho Farm Bureau. Healthy and productive rangelands are critical in the West and depend upon water to assure the economical, social, and ecological well-being of local communities, businesses, and the hundreds of species and individuals that depend on them in the West. In addition to serving as the director of IRCP, I have 30 years of experience working on land use policy and 25 years working with locally led collaboratives. I have also served as the Public Lands Council president, chairman of the Owyhee Initiative, and on the Owyhee River Watershed Advisory Group for the State of Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. Every single one of those roles included conversations around water quality and conservation, and worked from a collaborative approach. Collaborative solutions are the only way to address this issue. For rangelands and agricultural communities in the West, water is not only vital to the economic well-being, but imperative for the wildlife and activities the areas support. Because of this, many states, counties, cities, and rural communities have already taken necessary measures to assure water quality and conservation standards are of the highest level. Additional federal rules and regulations and unclear definitions seem to be unnecessary and overreaching. In Idaho, state water laws are already in place, as they are in many of the other Western states. Many of these laws are already more stringent than many of the federal regulations. Stakeholders at this level have day-to-day skin in the game to assure that the drinking water, irrigation water, and water for livestock, wildlife, and other uses are at their highest quality and meeting standards to assure consistency and long-term well-being, both ecologically and economically. Idaho has been a proactive and progressive state in taking an approach by implementing groundwater management plans, runoff standards, best management practices for agriculture, and water quality standards on total maximum daily loads, addressing concerns such as sediment and temperature. Because of these plans and measures that are already in place, unclear rules or additional jurisdiction can often disrupt things that are already working and of a higher standard in place. Rules and definitions must make sense to the industries and communities in the state, and also the differing hydrological systems and aquifers unique to that state. There also needs to be a balance between the state and federal regulations, as states across the nation differ widely, and states are best left to implement. States are set up to assure compliance, often as Idaho is, and it is questionable if the federal agencies would have the bandwidth or the jurisdiction to enforce compliance. We feel this should also be left up to the individual states, and any new rules or definitions should not prevent a state from continuing their activities and efforts of implementing the Clean Water Act that are already in place. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and I feel in closing that the definition needs to be clear, not lacking clarity. It can't be too broad in its attempt, encompassing things that should not be encompassed, and the proper balance of state and federal power must be maintained and assured. Stakeholders need regulatory certainty to know what applies and to be able to comply. Interfering in practices or measures or unclear definitions do not provide that certainty. Again, thank you for the opportunity to participate, and I look forward to the comments and discussion.
Great, Brenda, thank you. I've got Dan, then Jeff, then Tiffany. Dan, please.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Dan Kaplan. I'm the Executive Director of the Family Farm Alliance. I'd like to thank EPA and the Corps for proposing this roundtable format to discuss WOTUS. And many thanks also to President Jamie Johansson and Aaron Houston of the California Farm Bureau for including us in today's roundtable. The Alliance represents family farmers, ranchers, irrigation districts, and allied industries in 17 Western states. World-class agricultural production is created by irrigation of farmland in these states. This productive farmland is highly dependent on the continued consistent operation and maintenance of canal, ditch, and drainage systems. Each of these complex systems carry irrigation water to Western family farms and ranches. Over the past 2 decades, we've engaged in a variety of ping-pong administrative efforts, now spanning 4 different presidential administrations, all of them aimed at clarifying the application and interpretation of the Clean Water Act. We have significant concerns with the latest proposed rule. It incorporates both the significant nexus and relatively permanent test from the Supreme Court decision in Rapanos to temporarily define Clean Water Act jurisdiction for wetlands, other waters, and tributaries. This vastly expands regulatory jurisdiction beyond just returning to the pre-2015 regulations and guidance as proposed in the rule. We believe the agency should limit the scope of the proposed rulemaking to only restoring pre-2015 regulations and guidance. They should not be modified to reflect the agency's further interpretation of the Supreme Court decisions in this rulemaking. Any possible expansion of WOTUS in future rulemaking could transform the Clean Water Act into a federal land use regulation. This could impact Western farming communities in many ways, such as adding new regulatory burdens to important infrastructure projects, expanded opportunities for litigation, and shifting away from local and state water management. We support the proposed rules preamble, recognizing that most ditches are not jurisdictional WOTUS. The rule should also clearly state that the construction, operation, maintenance, repair, and rehab of these man-made ditches and canals and maintenance of drains are not viewed as jurisdictional WOTUS. The agency's July 2020 guidance memo is frequently used to perform work on implementing Section 404F exemptions for construction and maintenance of ditches and maintenance of canals and drains. This memo should be kept in place regardless of any future WOTUS rule. These exemptions provide important assurances that irrigated agriculture can continue to function without the need for Clean Water Act permits to work on these critical man-made features. If the agencies rescind the ditch exemption memo, they should also reinstate and use the July 2007 Army Corps Regulatory Guidance Letter number 0702. Improving and maintaining water quality in the West can best be achieved through partnerships conducted at the local, regional, state, and federal levels. These important partnerships must continue to be nurtured and maintained as we navigate the implementation of yet another rule in the years ahead. Thanks.
And thank you. Next in line, I've got Jeff, Tiffany, then Greg. Jeff, please.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm Jeff Pemstein. I'm a home developer and land developer and home builder in Sacramento, California. I've been doing so for 33 years. And I feel like I'm participating in Groundhog Day all over again because now we're redefining waters of the U.S. So this is kind of cool. So I represent the California Building Industry Association. I'm its former chair. I'm also on the board of directors for the National Association of Home Builders. Our members do what a lot of folks on this call do, which is we provide essential services. So whether it's food, minerals, what have you, we provide shelter. And so in California, we're fortunate that we're 1 million housing units short of where we should be, and we've got another 2 million housing units that we're supposed to build in the next 7 years. And so part of that, and I think I've heard the resounding guidance from everybody on this call thus far, is clarity, certainty, lack of subjectivity. And those are the watchwords. I think if you were to talk to fellow home builders around the country, or in California in particular, we believe in conserving our natural resources. We believe in supporting our wetlands and our waters. I sit at the confluence of 2 major rivers in California. But that being said, we also have a mandate to provide housing for people. And in order to do that, we do need a path that doesn't take 7 to 10 years to get a wetland permit, which I can attest I've had more than 1 or 2 experiences in that realm. So we're looking forward to a robust discussion. We're hoping that something of great value and benefit comes out to all parties, because in having these discussions, it's both everybody being happy and everybody being somewhat unhappy with the outcomes. I would be remiss if I also didn't mention that in California, we're doubly blessed with a set of wetland guidelines that were adopted by our Regional Water Quality Control Board, which are more restrictive than what was the WOTUS definitions. So that I ask that whatever we do come up with at the end of the day, that there's recognition that there's the potential here in California for conflict. And so we're hoping that there is some recognition and maybe even some definition that comes out of this new WOTUS discussion that will bring some greater clarity. And lastly, for us, there's a whole series of jurisdictional determinations that are sort of hanging in the balance right now. We do hope that those, as well as all the litany of exclusions that I heard at least a couple of other folks mention, continue on. We do want to continue building houses as babies show up at hospitals and people move to California, in deference to what folks may think that they're all moving to other parts of the country. We still do have a large population here. We still have houses to build, and we'd like to do it in a responsible, predictable, and clear way. So thank you very much for allowing us to participate.
Great. Jeff, thank you. I've got Tiffany, Greg, and Kristen. Tiffany, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany Monroe, and I am joining you from the state of Oregon. I am a multi-generational farmer. I serve as a Farm Bureau president in Lane County, which is located on the western side of the state. And Oregon is like many of the people who spoke before. We think our state is pretty unique ourselves. We have a mountain range going right through the center of our state, which means the western side, particularly the coast and the Willamette Valley, and into north and south of there are very wet, and for a portion of the year are very dry in the valley. And on the eastern side of the state and central Oregon are very dry for most of the year. This creates a lot of unique challenges and unique solutions and needed depending on what territory you are at within the state. I want to share why I'm here and what perspective I bring to the table. I am a 6th generation farmer, but in 2020, my husband and I started our own family farm. So we bring a new family farm perspective. And most importantly, I'm here to bring an environmental justice lens to this discussion. I help lead a program called the Black Food Fund to bring in philanthropic investments to Black farmers who are typically, underserved within our state, and work with our sister organization, the Black Oregon Land Trust. I've also been appointed by Governor Kate Brown as a member of the Environmental Justice Council here in Oregon, and serve as the Environmental Equity Co-Chair within the Racial Justice Council. I hope that I can share with you later today some of the unique ways in which Oregon defines environmental justice communities in our state, and specifically how WOTUS will impact and create barriers not only for multi-generational farmers, land managers, and builders to our environmental justice communities, and talk about how we can break through some of those challenges by working together and identifying where some of those challenges are. So looking forward to additional discussion today.
Great. Tiffany, thank you. I've got Greg, Kristen, Amanda, and Jason. Greg,
good morning, everybody. Thanks, Rob, for hosting this, and thank you to the Army Corps and EPA for putting together these roundtables, and to the California Farm Bureau for including us on this panel. So much appreciated. I think you're going to see several reoccurring themes today in our discussion. You've already heard a lot of that this morning in opening comments. But I'm the Government Relations Officer for Elsinore Valley Municipal Water District, and we are a public nonprofit retail and water sewer agency that provides water supply development, planning, wastewater treatment and disposal, and water recycling. And we serve about 155,000 people in a 100 square mile area. Much of our water supply, approximately 65%, is imported into Southern California via aqueducts, pipelines, and storage reservoirs. We also have a robust local water supply from groundwater and freshwater storage reservoirs that account for approximately 35% of our overall water supply. We understand the challenges climate change and more severe drought cycles will have on overall water supply reliability in California and the arid West, and our collective capacity to effectively manage water resources in the near and long term. An overly expansive definition of WOTUS in any new rule will only further complicate statewide and local efforts to provide safe and reliable water supply for families. EVMWD understands the EPA and the Army Corps, and I'll refer to them as agencies the rest of my comments, are revising the definition of WOTUS in 2 steps, proposing a foundational rule to restore and return, at least temporarily, to the longstanding pre-2015 definition of WOTUS, as further defined by the agency's 1986 regulations and informs Supreme Court case law. And then number 2, building upon this proposed rule at some point in the near future. However, we remain concerned that the effort will not remove all regulatory uncertainty and could lead to agency overreach. We certainly appreciate the agency's effort with these roundtables to seek input on topics related to the scope of the definition and implementation of WOTUS and the proposed rule. Therefore, we request the agencies clarify throughout the entire process that any infrastructure which is an integral part of and facilities water supply and treatment, stormwater management and treatment, flood control, wastewater treatment, and recycled water production and distribution to be excluded, expressly excluded from the definition of the waters of the United States. We fully believe that an appropriately crafted rule with such exclusions can protect the nation's waters in a manner that does not hinder the operation or maintenance of crucial health and safety services. These exclusions will allow water agencies to operate affordable, reliable, and resilient water supply systems. They will further provide clarity and certainty in permitting for the water community while helping the agencies implement the Clean Water Act and its laudable goals. We are concerned that, however, there are no such express exclusions in the proposed rule. Although the agencies have stated it is their long-standing practice to exclude certain types of infrastructure from the definition of WOTUS, we believe this needs to be stated explicitly in the new rule. Simply stated, general references to past practices did not provide the same level of protection as express exclusions. The path moving forward regarding how to define waters of the United States will not only have a substantial impact on the operational activities of water and wastewater agencies throughout the arid West, but also on those who will disproportionately bear the cost burden, our local customers. EVMWD appreciates the agency's time and consideration of our perspective and looks forward to developing a robust definition of WOTUS that protects both the nation's waters and the public health and safety while avoiding placing any added cost burden or regulation on us or our customers. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I've got Kristen, Amanda, then Jason. Kristen.
Hi, my name is Kristen Rivard. I'm the Oregon Director of Trout Unlimited, and thank you for the opportunity to share TU's perspectives about the value of clean water. TU staff, alongside our 340,000 members and supporters, are excited about the chance to collaborate with other stakeholders to build durable programs to define and conserve the waters of the United States. In fact, TU's mission is to bring together diverse interests to care for and recover rivers and streams so our children can experience the joy of wild and native trout and salmon. In pursuit of this mission, TU actively works on the ground to restore streams, rivers, wetlands, and riparian habitats to recover sustainable populations of native fish across the country, and 2/3 of this work happens in the Western states. The many stream restoration projects we undertake each year are required to secure water quality permits. And as users of this system, we see great opportunity to clarify the specific actions that require permitting, bring consistency to permitting processes and review, and increase the efficiency of the permitting process, all while sustaining critical protections for our nation's water and aquatic resources. Given that riparian and stream restoration are at the core of our work, we understand some of the concerns about the definition of WOTUS that have been presented in public comment by agricultural producers and other industry representatives. TU's restoration work often includes working with landowners and water right users who are also agricultural and livestock producers. This work requires us to build strong collaborations with ranchers, farmers, and mining and timber companies in order to find win-win solutions for cold water conservation and the other important uses of water. With decades of experience, both as a permittee under the Clean Water Act and as a restoration partner to these industries, we firmly believe that by clarifying the long-standing statutory exemptions for agriculture, silviculture, and ranching activities from permitting requirements under the Clean Water Act, many of the issues raised in prior public comments are fully addressed. By recognizing and importantly publicizing what types of activities are already exempt from permitting activities and revising these activities as needed, we can focus our attention on the collective benefits all Americans can realize with clean water for future generations. With this in mind, I offer TU's belief that in order to assure clean water for drinking, farming, and healthy fisheries, we must recognize and conserve the full extent and complexity of our river systems. Our western rivers often begin high up in the mountain ranges, and protection of these headwaters, including ephemeral streams and wet meadows, is essential to assuring the quality of water downstream, as impacts to our waters are cumulative. Increased frequency of drought, warming stream temperatures, and variable precipitation patterns due to climate change, for example, more snowfall coming as rain, necessitate a precautionary approach to protecting our rivers, or we risk more frequent hazardous algal blooms, more closures of our fisheries due to hot river temperatures, and continued loss of clean water. Thank you again for the opportunity to participate in this process. We really look forward to the conversation.
Great, Kristen, Kristen, thank you. Amanda, you're up, and then Jason. Amanda.
Hello, my name is Amanda Castor, and I serve as the Director of the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. I'm here today on behalf of the state of Montana to offer our perspectives regarding the federal government's Waters of the U.S. rulemaking efforts. I'd like to extend a thank you to the California Farm Bureau for its coordination of this roundtable and for including Montana in the discussion today. While we always appreciate efforts to engage, this particular roundtable effort is ill-timed, given that the Supreme Court is presently revisiting WOTUS for the fourth time in Sackett versus U.S. From the state of Montana's perspective, any rule adoption needs to recognize and respect the state's role in preserving the integrity of our waters. The jurisdiction of the federal agencies is not boundless, as was specifically recognized by the Congress in the passage of the Clean Water Act. The state has a role. As such, WOTUS should not be used to circumvent state primacy under the Clean Water Act. In addition, Montana is a partner, not a stakeholder. To that end, it would have been appreciated if the Army Corps and EPA had been working with us from the beginning, not making us compete for a seat on roundtables. Lastly, I echo the comments of others who have highlighted that predictability and consistency continue to be an issue. Vacillating between different WOTUS definitions or adopting an approach that creates more ambiguity and uncertainty makes it difficult for states trying to implement their federal Clean Water Act responsibilities. Thank you, and I look forward to further sharing Montana's perspective with you all further today.
Amanda, thank you. Jason, you're up.
Great. I guess the benefit of being last is you get to say amen and we get to move on. But I want to make sure that that we have an opportunity to express our opinion. So I'm here on behalf of Paul Arrington, the Idaho Water Users Association. The Idaho Water Users Association represents over 300 irrigation districts, canal companies, groundwater districts, agribusiness, public water supply organization, and professional firms and individuals from around the great state of Idaho. I just to add a few additional comments that have already been said today, we need to make sure that the new rule provides certainty and clarity for the water users and not to overstep the importance of the state jurisdictions to create that balance of power between the federal government and the state government, as has been said. It's often difficult when you start a race and the hurdles begin to move and you're not quite sure which hurdle is going to be placed next and how to get over and around that hurdle. And so making sure that any new rule not prevent or impair Idaho from continuing their active efforts to implement the Clean Water Act in ways that make sense to Idaho and its industries and hydraulic systems. I appreciate and concur with many things that have been said today.
Jason, thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, I also appreciate everyone's mindfulness to the time limit. We are right on time, and that makes me very, very happy. So thank you all very, very much. What we're going to do now is going to feel really different than the introductions because we're going to move to a much more open discussion. Up on the screen, you should be able to see if I can get my mouse down there. Oops, I went too much. You should see 3 discussion questions. So we've got 45 minutes set aside for this discussion block. And what I'm going to be asking folks to do is to reflect on these discussion questions. And it's up to you on how you want to do that. And we've got 3 discussion questions here in this discussion block with a recognition that there's a lot of relationships between what these questions look like. But in 45 minutes, we should have more than ample time for you to weigh in at least once, everyone to weigh in at least once or twice on some of these discussion questions. In working with Jamie and his colleagues at the Farm Bureau, we've identified one person to get the conversation started for this, and that's Dan. And so Dan, I'm going to come to you in just a second. I'm going to be asking folks to raise their hand to get in the queue to reflect on these discussion questions after Dan. To do that, you can hit Alt-Y to raise your hand in Zoom. Or you can press the reactions button and then raise hand, and that will also get you into the queue. And then what I'll do is I will let folks know where they're at in the queue. You can always check where you're at in the queue by pressing that participants icon as well. So Dan, I'm going to come to you, and then I'm going to be looking for folks to raise their hand to jump in. So Dan.
Thanks, Rob. Hopefully I got a break here. I live in Klamath Falls, Oregon. We have F-16 training base about 5 miles from my place, and it sounds like I'm watching Top Gun in here. It was just a few minutes ago, but hopefully I got a break. So I'll start off and just say, you know, in the arid West, there's a significant presence of ephemeral rivers and streams that only flow after it rains or as snow melts. Ephemeral drainages are usually like dry land. They're not flowing rivers or streams. In some cases, ephemeral drainage only lasts a few hours or a few days for the whole year. They're fairly unique to the West, as are features like dry washes and arroyos. These features are important relative to WOTUS for my Western membership, but the scope of jurisdictional ditches continues to be the key issue, which was something that was touched on by others here earlier in their introductions. We need crystal clear exclusion from Clean Water Act jurisdiction for all of the West's important irrigation infrastructure. Otherwise, the entire Western irrigation and drainage system could be classified as a WOTUS and subjected to really incredible bureaucratic red tape. This could potentially disrupt the timing of water deliveries and result in the fallowing of some of the countries in the world's most reliable and consistent sources of food and fiber. And this claim's not overblown. We've seen it take as long as a decade to get Section 404 permits because the Corps is already overburdened by the currently defined waters under its jurisdiction. Without clear exemptions for these irrigation features, we know we'll see critics of irrigated agriculture claim that those features are subject to Clean Water Act jurisdiction. And this could spawn years of lengthy and costly litigation. It could also create a lot of uncertainty and it could cripple Western agriculture. We felt that the final 2015 rule failed to clearly articulate exempt ditches and left decisions to exclude other ditches to subjective interpretation. On the other hand, the 2020 NWP rule outlines 6 categories as meeting the definition of WOTUS. It also described the 11 categories that do not. We felt this was the clearest governing regulatory roadmap yet to be put forward regarding WOTUS. The final rule provided a significant level of certainty with regard to what falls into definition and what does not. For those features that are not WOTUS, the 2020 rule specifically clarified that waters of the U.S. do not include features that flow only in response to precipitation, such as ephemeral flows, dry washes, arroyos, and similar features. We supported this clarification and also the other specific features that were not considered to be WOTUS. The agencies in 2020 also clarified and defined the term prior converted cropland, waste treatment system. Both those terms felt that improved the regulatory predictability and the clarity for those definitions, those terms. So we'll continue to advocate that irrigation and non-tidal drainage ditches should be exempt from jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act. Roadside ditches and other drainage infrastructure not constructed in a tributary or an adjacent wetland should not be considered WOTUS. Artificial ponds built on dry lands, which is an important feature of many farming operations, should not be considered to be WOTUS. And as I said earlier, irrigation drainage ditches should continue to be exempted for permitting for maintenance operations. And finally, we don't believe future precipitation trends should impact implementation of WOTUS. A water feature is either WOTUS or it's not. It shouldn't depend on precipitation trends. Hopefully that kicks things off for you, Rob.
Here I am. I'm the professional, and I'm the first one to speak into my mute button. Okay, professional. So we've got three folks in the queue. We've got Jennifer, I've got Kristen, and then Greg. So Jennifer, please unmute yourself and jump into the conversation.
Thank you very much, Rob, and thanks for the floor. I will say me too to everything that was just said. Sounds like we in Nevada have a lot in common with our neighbor to the north. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the similar features: ditches, upland lakes, and ephemeral waters. Starting with ditches, Nevada has a long history in agriculture and other water management schemes that have created some very complex ditch and sluice systems that are really hard to unwind when we're discussing jurisdiction. Some water supply features off the main stem or tributary of a river, and others, and as opposed to water supply features, are agricultural return flow features that reconnect with a main stem or a tributary. And some water features serve both purposes. When the Army Corps has sought to find out whether a ditch has replaced a prior natural drainage to decide whether or not it might be jurisdictional as a tributary, sometimes historic maps may exist that predate the construction of these ditches and sloughs, and sometimes those maps and things have just been lost to the ages. When it comes to identifying tributaries in this environment, I think the Arid West is likely unique in comparison with other parts of the nation, and we've sought EPA's recognition of these differences in consideration that one rule may just not fit the country. Evaluating agricultural ditches on a case-by-case basis is onerous and time-consuming, and for the agencies to make jurisdictional determinations in this way and have to go through them on case-by-case basis, we really lose clarity for landowners who seek to know the status of the waters that they rely on. In regard to upland lakes, I'm talking about either natural or man-made. In the east or other wetter areas of the US, some might observe that upland lakes or man-made water bodies have a relatively close connection to a flowing surface water. The same cannot be said for upland lakes in Nevada. As you're likely aware, we fundamentally object to EPA and the Corps asserting jurisdiction through groundwater. In Nevada, an upland lake or a man-made water body, including irrigation water reservoirs, can be many, many miles away from a flowing WOTUS water. And while the lake or reservoir may contribute to groundwater that eventually makes it to a flowing water, this is no cause for federal regulation of the water body, as EPA has asserted in the 2015 connectivity report. The vastness of Western topography really needs to be considered carefully when considering upland lakes. Now, in regard to ephemeral waters, the character of ephemeral waters in Nevada can vary even within our own state. I'm sympathetic to the comments by Kristen Rivard with Trout Unlimited about some of the ephemeral waters that she mentioned. But for us, some flow more regularly and some are very, very dry. So I had a photo that I can't share, but so imagine yourself on a hillside. I was hiking my dog, there's a picture of him, walking among the pinyon pines and sagebrush where two vertical slopes of hillsides intersect and form a crease where water flows during storm events. Imagine a lengthy depression coming down from that hillside where water could potentially flow downhill through an ephemeral drainage toward a river that's jurisdictional. I use the term downhill very intentionally instead of downstream because oftentimes these ephemeral features aren't really streams. EPA and the Corps, I think across the country, the staff, especially maybe in Washington, DC, have very different mental models on what our country looks like based on their life experience. And I'm not sure that everyone at EPA or the Corps appreciates storm patterns in the West. Unlike the East, where a stormy day is overcast and rainy for miles, or even over an entire state, in the West, storm cells are often very localized and can be dry as a bone just a mile away. I've literally seen it where heavy snow or rain on one side of my neighborhood is occurring while it's completely dry on the other side of my neighborhood. Storms are often short duration and move fast, and sometimes they get hung up on a mountaintop and provide intense rainfall. When these storms do get hung up on a mountaintop and provide a significant amount of precipitation. These drainages or creases in the hillsides can carry flow, but oftentimes we have drainages or ephemeral water bodies that can go decades, and I use that in the plural, decades between flow events. Just because it's on the, just because a line can be drawn on a map that takes water theoretically from a hillside to jurisdictional WOTUS water downhill, doesn't mean that that line should be drawn. It can take several miles to try to make that water connect to a jurisdictional water, but theoretically it could make it if you drew the line. This is important, I think, because we have to be cognizant of what this scenario means when someone might want to put a culvert across a drainage of this nature or some other type of activity that works in the waterway. Many would say that this represents a federal permitting burden that should not be carried by the landowner. Other hillsides have historic mining activity where exploration and extraction occur, sometimes on a small scale. Where mining activity does blossom, the state of Nevada has programs in place to protect our natural resources in areas like this, and likewise protect our downhill waters. We have had federal partners visit us from the East Coast, and they've been literally stunned by the unique land features in our high desert and the massive nature of our land features that go for dozens or hundreds of miles. I suggest that Nevadans are best suited to regulate the majority of land like this, where waterway lines could be drawn on a map to connect such features to a WOTUS water. But I would ask that the EPA and the Corps really ask themselves if they should regulate these areas, even if they could, and what the natural resource protection value that would be gained by federal regulation over what the states are able to provide already. I think with a better understanding of Western land and water features, hopefully EPA and the Corps will better appreciate that states should be provided the allowance to decide what and how to regulate if there's no appreciable impact on a downstream jurisdictional water. Finally, I would just want to talk about ephemeral breaks. It's super fast. Ephemeral breaks are really important because, as I've talked about these distances, water can infiltrate the top of an alluvial fan coming out of a hillside, but then disappear 4 miles before it would make it to underground to any sort of jurisdictional water. So I would ask that ephemeral breaks be seriously reconsidered by EPA. Thanks.
Great, Jennifer, thank you. I've got Kristen, then Greg. Yeah, Kristen.
Thanks, Rob. Well, first I would say thanks to Dan Keppen for his comments. And I certainly agree with my friend Dan about the importance of clarifying some of those exemptions that already exist from the permitting process. And we support the value and importance of that effort. I think I differ a little bit than the last two speakers about our perspective on the importance of ephemeral and intermittent streams and wet meadow systems here in the West. And there's a very extensive body of scientific literature that's peer-reviewed that talks about the importance of those systems and how they moderate water quality, sediment, temperature, and nutrient impacts further down in these systems. Especially here in Oregon is what I can speak to most closely, but those systems provide really critical geomorphic and hydrologic functions, again, with respect to sediment movement, groundwater recharge, shallow groundwater interaction, and hyperheic flows. And all of those things are directly correlated with clean water, including temperature and nutrient protections. Storm events are really important in those geographies. They deliver wood to these systems, which also moderates how nutrients and water flow through. And they're really important for food web dynamics as well. And, I certainly agree with Dan that a water is either WOTUS or not, and we can't predefine things based on a perception of climate change. But I would say that with climate change, these headwater and wet meadow systems are even more critical because of how they provide natural storage that is directly connected to our downstream surface water systems in terms of the timing and the quality of water that returns there. They also provide important functions to attenuate flood situations. It seems like there's some conversation about how exactly we define perennial and ephemeral streams. And I, certainly agree that some thought needs to go into that. We've recently finished a fairly extensive effort here in Oregon under the private forest accords, which looked at how we will alter protections for perennial and ephemeral systems and how we will define perenniality, and looking at the range of probability for how likely a system is to be perennial. And you can certainly, dial that knob up and down based on the frequency of flow in a particular system. So I think given the really important value that those streams and wetlands provide to clean drinking water, cold water downstream, and all of the other values that Americans associate with our waterways, protections are really important, while keeping in mind that our normal ranching, farming activities and timber harvest cannot be subject to additional permitting requirements there because those statutory exemptions already exist. So that's how we find kind of the balance, that it's really important to protect and recognize the value of those systems, while also making sure that there's reasonable pathways for continued economic use of our waterways.
Kristen, thank you. I've got Greg and then Todd. Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I'll keep my comments relatively brief here on this, just to say I second what Dan Keppen and Jennifer Carr talked about, made some very good points there. The only thing I guess that I would add there is when it's related to the ephemeral stream conversation, and Dan was focused really on runoff, storm runoff. But I'd also add that we have creeks, small creeks near our area, and we're in a very southern part of California in Riverside County, and it's incredibly dry in this area. So even if we do get runoff, it perks into the ground most times before it even reaches those particular creeks or streams. But also sometimes these creeks and streams, the only time they ever have water in them outside of flood flows is when we're discharging Title 22 recycled water into those streams, and that's the only time those creeks and streams see water running through them. So there is a definite need, like I had said in my opening comments, as well as many of the others on this call today have said, we need certainty and express exclusions on there for these types of facilities. Thanks.
Greg, thank you. I have Todd, then Amanda, and then Tiffany. I noticed that you put your hand up and then put it down. If you want to still be in the queue, Tiffany, please put your hand back up and I will make sure to get to you. Todd, then Amanda. Todd.
Thank you. I would just again similarly second what has been said in regards to the streams, and feel that they should not be jurisdictional. The one thing I'd also mention is that precipitation trends we don't see will have impacts in the arid west region, just because, for instance, in Wyoming, we have less than 16 inches of annual rainfall, and we haven't seen it change significant enough in the last 100 years, to show that there's going to be a trend that affects WOTUS in that. The ephemeral side, that connectivity should be continuous and perpetual in regards to WOTUS. Otherwise, it needs to be left at the state's call to determine that. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I've got Amanda, Tiffany, then Jason.
Thank you, Rob. I'm going to try to quickly cover these three questions and just cover what exactly this means for the state of Montana. So the Montana water resources that are most implicated here by the EPA and Army Corps' jurisdictional confusion are wetlands, particularly wetlands that are not adjacent to other sources, ditches, potholes, ephemeral, and intermittent sources. So ditches are crucial in Montana, given the arid nature of our state, and they allow our lands to be arable. Potholes are extremely important in Montana, providing water for stock and wildlife year round, while their ephemeral or intermittent sources are unavailable.
Damming and reserving ephemeral and intermittent sources is also critical to preserve consistent and continued water sources throughout the driest parts of the year. Montana's position is that these should not be classified as WOTUS. It is erroneous to believe that only WOTUS are protected and regulated. Non-WOTUS are regulated just by the state on the state level. State determined and state managed is best. Adding a federal level of protection review does not improve these protections. And then quickly, just to touch on what we're seeing in the state of Montana in terms of precipitation, obviously our trends have changed. Also, so does the nature of the water sources. We're seeing sources change from intermittent to ephemeral. What may have once been a wetland may now look like a pothole. As sources change, we aren't seeing designations and associated regulations change. In many instances, we're seeing overregulation of sources that are beyond federal jurisdiction. The Army Corps and EPA regulatory system needs to recognize the need for this flexibility and the fact that precipitation trends may mean changes in jurisdictional authority. And the Army Corps and EPA regulations need to rely more on state agencies in capturing these changes and adjusting accordingly, since the state agencies are more aware and familiar with these sources and their evolution. Thank you.
Amanda, thank you. I have Tiffany, then Jason. Tiffany, please.
Hello again, everyone. Tiffany Monroe from Oregon. I wanted to take some time to talk about how WOTUS may affect us in Oregon, and particularly, again, speaking from a farmer's perspective and environmental justice perspective. So I have to be really honest and say that farming in Oregon is extremely challenging. Even myself, coming from a multi-generational farm, I often find myself looking at my husband across our table here and say, you know, can we make it? Are we going to be able to make it this season or next year? So I think whenever we're talking about regulation or rules that might impact farmers, land managers, builders, and those that benefit from the services that are provided, I think we really need to be honest about what condition people are going through. And that doesn't even consider, you know, inflation and some of the input costs that we have here in Oregon and in other Western states as well. So earlier I mentioned that I was really excited to talk about how in Oregon we define environmental justice. And first I have to give a shout out to the EPA for the decades of work in the environmental justice space and creating tools and definitions for us, you know, who are boots on the ground in the states to be able to create frameworks and work here at home. So, and I'm going to give a little bit of detail about how we got to this point, because I see some parallels within process that might be helpful for shaping how continued work in WOTUS goes. So in 2007, Oregon established an environmental justice task force. We were the first state to do so in the US. And this task force advised the governor as well as state agencies around environmental justice issues. And this task force has been very successful. However, with time, we realized that there needs to be more legs behind the task force. And in the 2020 long session here in Oregon, we put together a bill to put together this task force and transition it to a council through statutory law, as well as develop our own environmental justice screening data tool. And so what happened was, you know, we put together a bill. We were really excited about it, but there were challenges with it. Definitions were not clear. People didn't know if they were considered an environmental justice community or not, how this would affect land, natural resources, water quality management, and daily functions and infrastructure within communities. So as a result, the bill failed. Which isn't the worst thing in the world. To not get something right the first time isn't bad. It happens all the time. And so when coming back with the governor's office, who I work with, sitting on some councils, we came back and included additional voices to the table. The Oregon Farm Bureau was a part of discussions the entire time. We also brought in Oregonians for Food and Shelter, an organization that advocates for tools for natural resources and farmings, as well as our timber industry. We brought multiple voices to the table and really talked about what are definitions, how do they impact us, and what sort of benefits will this actually provide us in Oregon. And the wonderful thing is that both Democrats and Republicans were able to get behind the bill. And in the 2021 short session, it passed. And what's really unique is the way in which we defined environmental justice communities. So we consider environmental justice communities, communities of color, communities experiencing low incomes, communities experiencing health inequities, tribal communities, rural communities, remote communities, coastal communities, communities with limited infrastructure, communities with traditional who are underrepresented in public process and adversely harmed by environmental hazards, including seniors, youth, and persons with disabilities. And so what's amazing about that definition is it includes a lot of different communities all over Oregon, folks with different racial, ethnic compositions, folks with different socioeconomic statuses that are impacted by conditions within our state. And so I wanted to bring that as an example, because I think that definition of environmental justice communities should be implemented at the EPA and maybe in other states. But most importantly, I really want you to see the process we had in including different voices and solving problems together. And I think that this should be what is done here within this process, knowing how things impact folks. So when it comes to environmental justice challenges in Oregon, one thing I want to focus on, which was touched upon earlier, is the need for affordable housing. In Oregon, it is extremely challenging, even if you are a middle-class family, to be able to afford or to be able to purchase a home, particularly in the western side of the state, which also happens to be the side of the state that has a lot of precipitation for a large portion of the year and is dry. So that gets into the complexities of definitions of ephemeral drainages and how that's regulated. But we really have the need for developing affordable housing. But since, our most populated side of the state, areas where environmental justice communities need affordable and safe housing, we run into classification as wetlands and the need for mitigation infrastructure. However, those that have a passion for wanting to build affordable housing run into an immense amount of challenges with process, litigation, and cost. And so it basically becomes completely unaffordable to build affordable housing. And so that is a huge concern. And so we would like to see some flexibility, especially, if we care about environmental justice communities, if we care about community infrastructure, if we care about food systems, we need to make sure that we are providing flexibility for that. And then I'm going to wrap up with one other point is to discuss, what it's like being a farmer here. As I look out the three windows I'm facing, each direction I'm seeing an ephemeral drainage area. And one of the benefits that I have as a multi-generational farmer and a new farmer is I share with folks what they might be facing when they want to pursue farming or continue to be in this industry and be a part of the food system. And it is awful to be able to tell people how you basically can't afford to do the basics of what you want to do, or you'll have to wait 10 years and maybe even face jail time, depending on what actions you take just to plow your field, just to grow food. And so I think we need to really pay attention to what it's like and how we impact people who are literally just trying to grow food and be responsible and conscious land managers. So I want to thank everyone for your comments and looking forward to chatting more in a bit.
Thank you. So I've got Jason and then Kristen, and then I don't have anyone else in the queue, and we have probably time for 4 or 5 more folks to jump into the conversation in this discussion block. So please feel free to press Alt-Y or raise your hand button to get into the comment queue. Fabulous. So I've got now 5 people in the queue, which is great. So Jason and Kristen.
You make a call for hands and that's what you get, right? No, as I sit here and listen to the conversation a little bit more, it reminds me of why it's so important for states to be able to have the jurisdiction and have the need to control the waters inside of their boundaries. As we look at here, and I sit in southern Idaho and Twin Falls, Idaho, many of the ditches and canal systems here were man-made And agriculture is a huge part of the state of Idaho. And making sure that we don't hamper production agriculture and feeding the world, to be able to control and understand that. Again, it reminds me, or reiterates in my mind, of why the state powers are so important, because each of us have unique challenges within inside of our cities, our towns, our counties, our states, and that control really needs to be localized in those efforts. And also we have some Supreme Court rulings that are, or some things in front of the Supreme Court right now that we need to make sure that that process works its way out, that we don't get out in front of making definitions that could potentially be changed by that body here in the future. And so, you know, the change in precipitation affects each of us. And again, and I think that's why it's important for the states to be able to understand those patterns inside of their state. As the state of Idaho works to look at the system here in southern Idaho, our precipitation patterns have changed a little bit, but we're able to manage those and work inside of those scenarios, put water in our ditches. But you go to northern Idaho and their reality is a little bit different than here in southern Idaho. And so again, reiterate the fact that the states really need the ability to control and work with the waters inside of their jurisdictions.
Great. Jason, thank you. Kristen, Tammy, Phyllis, then Brenda. Kristen, please.
I'll be quick, as I know I already spoke, but I just wanted to offer, you know, despite my representation of a fishing and conservation group, I grew up in my family's orchards, and my parents still actively, you know, ranch sheep and cattle in the Klamath Basin. So I do have a really good appreciation for agricultural operations and the needs. And in my mind, the existing exemptions for normal farming, ranching, silviculture activities are pretty all-encompassing. Ditch cleaning, maintenance, plowing, all of those things are already exempt from the permitting requirements. And so I just wanted to sort of offer that up with a little bit of curiosity about some of the concerns that are being raised, that including, you know, ephemeral systems in the definition is problematic for food production, because as I see it, and my understanding, you know, again, those activities are already exempt from the permitting process, whereas the stream restoration work and wetland mitigation work and all of the things that we undertake at Trout Unlimited are subject to the permitting process, and we engage pretty actively in that, which I think is more for the second discussion block. So I'll save my remarks for that time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kristen. Tammy, Phyllis, then Brenda. Tammy.
Thank you. As I was listening to this discussion, I thought I'd touch a bit on the fact that without clear definitions, we could see things like intermittent ephemeral streams, ditches, vernal pools, which we have in Northwest Montana, smaller bodies and wetlands, substantially change from time to time. And it strikes me that if we're not really careful, I mean, as you've probably seen, read or heard, Montana is undergoing an enormous flooding event. I mean, Yellowstone Park may not have most of the park open for the remainder of the summer. We have houses going down our river. Numerous bridges have been lost. We have lines cut off by washed out roads, etc. I can guarantee you that if EPA or the Corps comes into Montana next year, after this is subsided, you're going to see a lot of areas that look like it could be an ephemeral stream because of the amount of water that is carved down. So that's why it's incredibly important to really kind of get those definitions right, and preferably hold to the relatively permanent Rapanos status. all of these hydrologic characteristics are important in the state of Montana, but we also have unique things going on within our industry, whereby oftentimes it is industry that provides cold, clear water when our rivers get low to make sure that our fisheries stay the same. We have creeks that haven't run for a long time being supplanted with some of this water. We own large pieces of ranch land. We have constructed wetlands, etc. I think everybody pulls together, but that's really only possible if any waters that aren't traditional navigable waters, that the authority for regulating that remains with our state. And we know what we have, we know where it's located. We're a large landmass with only 1 million people residing in this state, and it is critical for a state like Montana to retain that authority under very strict, comprehensive water quality and water quantity issues. Thank you.
Tammy, thank you. I've got Phyllis, then I've got Brenda. Phyllis, please.
Thank you very much. You know, a lot has been said that Hawaii supports, even though we are unique and we're separated by the Pacific Ocean, we do share the similar challenges and concerns. You know, we do have flashy orographic rainfall events. We have innumerable ephemeral streams and only one inland navigable water. So we feel, like the others that have spoken before me, that these issues must be addressed in any new regulation. We do have isolated, localized rains between valleys that are only separated by a few miles. And, you know, like Tiffany has said before me, you know, most of our farmers are very small, limited income, and many or most are owned by traditionally underserved, socially disadvantaged producers. And they do not have the resources to understand and comply with the proposed rules. So I'd like to reiterate, like my colleagues before me, that farmers and ranchers need measurable, tangible requirements. And we do support the states having the ability to implement the proposed whatever final rules that are adopted. Thank you.
Great. Phyllis, thank you. I have Brenda, and then that's all I have in the queue. And if we end a little bit early, I know I've not that I'm keeping track, but I'm keeping track. But Katie, Jeff, Jamie, we haven't heard from you on this topic. No pressure. But after I come to Brenda, I'll make space for the folks we haven't heard from. And if we haven't heard, then we'll pop on to the next. Thanks, Jamie, for the thumbs up. Brenda, take it away.
Hey, thank you, Rob. And I'm going to reiterate what Jason said. When you're going towards the end, it's really easy to say amen to many of the comments that have gone before. I've been listening to all this great dialogue and waiting to participate to see if I could add anything different. I concur with so many of the comments that have been made by Dan, Amanda, Jason, Tiffany, and others. As I said before, I live in a high desert area, Owyhee County, Idaho, which is the southwest corner of Idaho. As a cow-calf business in this county on the high desert, we have unique and diverse landscapes, which is not any different than many of the states in the United States, but definitely in the West. Definitely Idaho is not as diverse as California, but we definitely go from high desert, dry areas to more rainfall up to the north. One of the concerns that I continue to hear and concur with is ephemeral streams, and also in our areas, as in many places in Oregon desert, Nevada desert, we have dirt tanks that collect water from storm aspects, and these are watering facilities for livestock and wildlife. So I feel that it's very important that this definition be clear, that it not be overreaching to include things such as ephemeral streams and these type of aspects in the definition. I'm also participating on the Owyhee River Water Advisory Group, and there are other water advisory groups that take these tributaries that are in these more rural areas and rural communities that we have total maximum daily loads, data and information and testing aspects in place in the state. And we feel that we've done a very good job on working collaboratively and also supporting these local communities. We're not much different in the ranching communities than in the farming communities, as the profit margin is low and often are in underserved areas, maybe not in the housing aspect, but in other aspects. So we truly need clear and distinct definitions that assure certainty for the individuals that rely on this water and are participating in plans that are already in place. So in closing, I would just like to say that the states, I really would like to rely on the state management aspects that are already in place. The states know the hydrological systems, the communities, and even the aquifers that differ and need to be dealt with, and can often provide the best assurance for that conservation, clean water, and the measures that need to be taken. So thank you.
Brenda, thank you. So I've got Jamie, and then I'm going to do a last call on these questions. And if I don't have anyone else wanting to participate and share their perspective on these questions, I'm going to move to the next. Jamie, please.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate pretty much kind of what everyone said. It seemed like we're pretty much on the same page, and even Kristen, your remarks, I mean, I think reiterated that there is still confusion as to what the exemption would be under this new rule. I think additional discussion is needed between the agencies and the stakeholders. For example, you know, when it comes to stuff like tributaries, ephemeral streams, and that, but even the definition of a tributary, you know, I think one of the things that we want to make sure of that preferable approach in a new WOTUS rule to tributaries would be the one provided by the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, which is included important clarification regarding the status of ephemeral streams that flowed only in response to participation by correctly concluding that they're not WOTUS. So we need, I think it's clear from this discussion, which has been robust and pretty extensive, that further discussion is needed to have that assurity that we will get these important exclusions. Because one of the things too for California's farmers and ranchers across the state, we rely on these critical exclusions, which establishes that prior converted cropland may be used for any purposes, so long as wetland conditions haven't returned. And so, of course, we would support maintaining that exclusion with any new rule.
Great. Jamie, thank you. Okay, so last call for comments here. We do have time for probably one more perspective here on these questions and still be on time. So I'm just going to pause here for just a moment. Yeah, Jennifer, you're going to get the last word on this.
Oh, thank you. Prior converted cropland was just mentioned, and I know this was a concern that we communicated with EPA on during a couple rounds of rulemaking now. You know, it's first of all, we would benefit from knowing if Nevada has any prior converted cropland. And I have asked that question before, and I've told that is proprietary information under a Food Safety Act or something like that. And so we weren't allowed to know. So my discussion is theoretical because assuming that we do have prior converted cropland in Nevada, that could potentially revert to a wet or a wetland or a wet meadow or situation if it were to go fallow. One of the things we wanted to make sure is considered is the fact that an agricultural producer may not have a senior enough water right to be able to put that land in production. And so it may come out of production and become dry and potentially revert out of cropland status merely because they don't have the right to call for water. And so any discussion about prior converted cropland has to have a real recognition of how Western water rights and water law works to make sure that there are no unintended consequences of accidental reversion of prior converted cropland into a wet scenario. Thanks.
Great, Jennifer, thank you. Okay, so we are going to switch now, and if I can get the PowerPoint slide to advance only one slide this time, that would be progress. Of course, I went the wrong direction. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to move to the next discussion block number 2, and we're going to run it the exact same way that we did discussion block 1. You all did wonderful, and they're using the raise hand feature, being respectful of each other's time, and being willing to jump into the conversation. So the questions are up there on discussion block number 2. These are oriented around implementation. And you can feel free to jump in once, address the comments here, jump in a couple of times if you wish to take the questions separately. We worked, obviously, like we did before, to identify the first speaker to get us rolling, and that's going to be Jamie. So I'm going to turn to Jamie, and I'm going to ask you to put your hands up to participate in the subsequent discussion. So Jamie, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of the role of Western state agencies that oversee and regulate water quality, I mean, I got an extensive list being in California, I think, as well as the rest of the Western states, but really the proposed rules expanding jurisdiction exposes farmers to unknowing violations of the law by farming in and discharging into features that look more like land than water. I mean, per Rapanos has been previously mentioned, the case there, the statute does not authorize a land as waters approach to federal jurisdiction. In addition to exceeding federal authority and contradicting U.S. Supreme Court directives, it would seem that this rule evades existing a state authority. Congress plainly expected that most activities on farmlands and pastures would be covered by state programs aimed at controlling non-point source pollution and would not be subject to federal permit requirements. And this is also evident in the exemptions included in the Clean Water Act. Just to point out, here in California, the state of California, as you can imagine, heavily regulates waters and activities that may affect waters. Since 1969, California has regulated the quality of waters within its borders under the Porter-Cologne Water Quality Control Act. This act provides that activities and factors which may affect the quality of waters of the state shall be regulated to attain the highest water quality that is which is reasonable, considering all especially, we have these extensive programs in place. We have irrigated lands program. All farmers who irrigate are required to be in up and down the state, paying significant fees to monitor water quality. New in the last few years, really mandatory nitrogen management plans in terms of runoff, why and how you are fertilizing, and then the returns that you are getting, and assuming that that nitrogen is at a level that is actually being taken up into the tree and used to produce food, so you're not over fertilizing. There is a critical network within California that already monitors the water quality of the state. There would be significant duplication of processes with this new rule when it comes to federal and state enforcement and jurisdiction.
Jamie, thank you. Okay, so again, asking folks to raise their hand here. I don't have anyone in the queue, so I'm going to give folks a minute to decide to jump in here. Great. I've got Kristen and then Todd. Kristen, please.
I'm so excited for this one. So my comments are really about question number 3 on this list. I pooled all of our Western restoration staff with just the question, hey, how are Section 404 permits going for you? And do you have any ideas about how we can make that process better? And so I synthesized those answers into just a handful of recommendations. The first is a suggestion that we could have a streamlined Section 404 reporting only process akin to the nationwide 27 permit for projects that happen on U.S. Forest Service lands, as well as the other categories of land that those are allowed, which include projects where you have a binding landowner agreement with a federal agency, and projects that occur on non-federal public land or private lands. And so these are a reporting only process that pertains to stream enhancement and restoration projects, wetland enhancement and restoration, all of that category of work. And being able to undertake that restoration work, which is entirely designed to provide uplift, improve water quality with the reporting only option, would really accelerate our ability to do wet meadow restoration and stream enhancement in our high mountain systems, which is a high priority from a water quality and reliability standpoint. So we'd like to make that recommendation. Another is that the aquatic resource delineations are very complex, sometimes costly and time consuming. And so for many of our projects, which are specifically wetland restoration projects and wetland enhancement projects, we are still obligated to do a full aquatic resource delineation for those. And we question the value of undertaking that expensive process, given that those projects are almost entirely designed to increase or mitigate for wetland loss in other places, and almost always increase the amount of functional wetland acreage, essentially being mitigation projects themselves, so they don't require mitigation. So we wanted to suggest that for projects whose primary purpose is to restore or enhance streams and wetlands, that we could either not have to do an aquatic resource delineation or require a less onerous one. For example, something using the National Wetlands Inventory or satellite imagery. And then the last one that I'll offer is we see a lot of variability in our experience completing Section 404 compliance based on who reviews the project, and in some cases, a lack of responsiveness or guidance. And so we see this sometimes with state agencies as well. But when we have staff turnover or different people interpreting the rules and guidance differently, it's very hard for us to correctly comply with those requirements. And so I think, again, standardizing and giving clear direction to regional staff, publishing agency-wide interpretations for issues that we commonly see as being interpreted differently in different regions would be really helpful to assure that our compliance is timely, effective, and responsive to the needs. Thanks so much.
Great, Kristen, thank you. I've got Todd, Dan, then Katie. Todd, please.
And I'd like to just speak briefly to each one of these questions, and really it comes down to clear definition. You know, if we get to where there's a clear definition that's not changing regularly, that's going to be helpful. We all have states that are co-regulators for water quality, and primary managers of water resources within our borders need that clear definition and concise. It's not changing all the time. So the state agencies can communicate clearly with one another. There's not confusion between those with the federal government in that process as well. Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality advocates for a WOTUS definition that both recognizes the limits of federal authority over water quality and clearly and objectively establishes what is and is not considered a WOTUS as informed by statute, jurisdictional precedent, and relevant science. It's vital that any revised definition of WOTUS is based on these three elements so that states and federal agencies can effectively and with certainty implement state and federal water regulations. And WACD, my association, concurs with one Department of Environmental Quality's position on that. Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality, EPA, and the Army Corps all have their avenues for permitting and regulating. We can envision the possibility of confusion when a state agency like AEQ thinks something should be non-jurisdictional, and the Army Corps may think it should be, vice versa. Therefore, we are not in favor of the new rule because it leaves so much open to interpretation. The navigable water protection rule was fairly straightforward and easily implementable by all parties. If we have a rule that's not clear, how do the agencies implement it without duplication or facing issues? Certainly communication is key, especially with state agencies and local governing entities. A consistent, long-standing, and clear definition of what exactly is jurisdictional or it's not. This constant back and forth what falls under the definition of grades and ineffective implementation program. In April of 2019, WHC submitted substantive comments on the proposed navigable water protection rule. The navigable water protection final rule was established on April 21st, 2020. This rulemaking process included all the same consultations proposed in the new rule. Close coordination and input was sought from a broad sector, including the state and local governments affected. There were numerous public outreach sessions and opportunities for in general, WHD is supportive of the final navigable waters protection rule. It intends that another rewrite of this rule is warranted premature. Again, I think with states having their own processes of protections, we need to leave it there as much as possible.
Great. Todd, thank you. I appreciate that. I've got Dan and Katie.
Yeah, thanks. So it's interesting. I represent, my organization represents farmers and ranchers in all 17 Western states. And because we're spread apart so far, we've long met virtually. We get together like once a year at our annual conference, and we spend a day, looking back at the past year, what's happened, and what our priorities are going to be for the coming year. Every year, our top priorities are basically dealing with implementation of federal environmental laws. The big one for us really probably is Endangered Species Act, but Clean Water Act is definitely up there. NEPA, National Historic Preservation Act, the way those laws are implemented sometimes, cause some grief for our members. So, when we talk about jurisdictional expansion, why are we so concerned about that as far as Clean Water Act issues go? I mean, I think there's a concern that Clean Water Act permits would trigger other federal and state requirements, like I just laid out. There can be regulatory enforcement and fines. Third-party litigation is a big issue for us, where activist, litigious environmental groups use these federal laws to sue federal agencies, but the person and the groups that end up paying the price are the farmers and ranchers who perhaps get water through a federal water project like we have here in the Klamath Basin or down in the Central Valley, and folks are concerned about their land values being eroded if it's found that there's jurisdictional waters on their property. Those are just certain examples. I like the question. It says, are there examples of water resources being regulated by multiple agencies and whether there's consistency or duplication? Again, I'm going to go a little bit off topic here, but where I live and in the Central Valley, you've got a very strong regulatory presence associated with these federal water projects, like the Central Valley Project, which is a Bureau Reclamation project, and the Klamath Project here in the basin. We've got tremendous problems, not necessarily related to Clean Water Act, but more Endangered Species Act, where you have National Marine Fisheries Service has jurisdiction over anadromous fish like salmon. Fish and Wildlife Service has jurisdiction over fish like suckers in Upper Klamath Lake, which is the lake behind Kristen's in her background today. And then in California, it's the Delta smelt. When these agencies aren't working closely together, you can have disastrous results where biological opinions are developed that require more water being dedicated to species than that's even in the system. And I'm telling you right now, we got a bad drought in the West right now, but there's a component to this drought that's associated with those regulations that are intended to protect fish listed under the Endangered Species Act. So one of the things that we really liked in the prior administration was the water sub-cabinet that was developed, where basically the assistant secretary level folks within the Corps and EPA, who I know already work closely together, would meet on a regular basis with the other assistant secretary level folks from like NRCS, USDA, Bureau of Reclamation, Department of Interior, just to sort of talk about some of these issues. And it really seemed like it was a think tank that got some real results. And I think this administration has an interagency drought coordination team, and I think it's NRCS and the Bureau of Reclamation. that's really great to see, but even more high level coordination on these issues in the West, I think would be super helpful. So, and then the last question, I guess, was, are there ways federal agencies could more effectively implement Clean Water Act permitting programs and jurisdictional determinations? What constitutes WOTUS has been, the subject of this great political and legal debate for more than 4 decades. We just need a clear, well-defined standard is what constitutes WOTUS, like everybody has been saying on this call. We feel that the 2020 NWPR provided that clarity and predictability, and it also sort of narrowed the 2015 WOTUS rule. We think if the agencies really want to make amendments, start with the NWPR first. If you really want sort of a durable and defensible rule. We think that the agencies can ensure clean water for all Americans through a blend of the Clean Water Act's regulatory and non-regulatory approaches, just as Congress intended. And finally, I'd just say, as others have said on this call, Family Farm Alliance really urges the agencies to pause this rulemaking until after the Supreme Court rules on Sackett versus EPA. Thanks.
Great, Dan, thank you. I've got Katie, you're up, and then I've got Jennifer after you. Katie, jump in.
Thank you. Gosh, there's been a lot of really great things said from the first block that I'd like to echo, and a lot, I guess, of what I have to say kind of branches off of that and has kind of been talked around, but I'd like to hit the nail on the head a little bit more. So I think one thing that's really important is we really need to remember to stay true to the legislative intent of the Clean Water Act and what it intended to do. And it intended to strike a balance between state and federal regulation and the need to provide for exemptions. And I think we can do a better job of confirming those exemptions and providing guidance on them. And something that kind of keeps coming up is I think there's this fear that if some body of water is not included in the definition of WOTUS, that it just won't be regulated. And I don't think that's true. As we've seen through our discussion here today, and as I've seen here in Idaho, state agencies are doing a great job of closely monitoring water quality and taking care of the waters in their state above and beyond what WOTUS provides. For example, here in Idaho, we have groundwater management plans, and we encourage and fund best management practices for agriculture. And our Department of Environmental Quality and State Department of Agriculture have a close working relationship, especially with CAFOs and dairies and feedlots, and work together to make sure that the features of our state are taken care of, but that they also, make sense from a common sense perspective that makes sense to our producers here. And one thing I kind of want to mention is I worry that if we make the definition of WOTUS too broad, that federal enforcement will be just stretched too thin and they won't have the resources or the bandwidth necessary to efficiently enforce and monitor, a really broad definition that contains, basically anything under the sun. And so I think we need to be careful and kind of go back to that state regulation theme where our states know their hydrologic systems better than anybody else and the people that use them, and we need to honor that. And as Dan kind of mentioned quickly, I agree. I don't understand why there is such a rush to do this rule right now with the Sackett appeal pending. That could provide a lot of clarity to the definition of WOTUS. And, it's possible that after this rule, is determined, that it may have to be revisited again to allow for whatever the Supreme Court decides and applies to this rule. And one other thing that really hasn't been mentioned quite yet is the County of Maui case that applies to groundwater. And groundwater hasn't been discussed very much yet, but it's been left to the regulation of the states. But this Maui County case, ends up applying to groundwater and set forth a functional equivalent test. And I just think that this rule needs to, if it's going to apply to that, we need to set narrow parameters around that so that the states retain their authority and retain control over groundwater like it was originally intended. So thank you.
Katie, thank you. So I've got one person in the queue, Jennifer, and I'll come to you, Jennifer, in just a second. We've got about 25 minutes left. So in my mind, that means we have time for at least 5 to 6, 7 more folks to jump into the conversation. So I'd like to see those hands go back up again. So Jennifer, you're up, and then I'll be looking for folks to jump into the conversation following Jennifer.
Great, thank you. Katie, thank you for your comments. I appreciated all of those. I was planning on talking about number 3, but I'll jump on that Maui conversation here real quick. As I mentioned before, we fundamentally oppose regulation of groundwater by the federal government for lots of reasons. But one of the things I wanted to mention that came out of Maui was an EPA guidance document that had 8 elements that was in place for a little while, and then it disappeared. We actually liked the 8th element that helped to clarify issues related to treatment of water and the inherent treatment, additional treatment that occurs in the subsurface and how it changes the character of the water as it flows from one piece of infrastructure to a body through groundwater. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there. What I really wanted to talk about during this particular session was number 3 in regard to improving the jurisdictional determination process. We think there are 4 areas that we believe warrant serious consideration. The first is that right now, a determination made by the Army Corps includes a disclaimer that it can only be used for the purposes of 404, the dredge and fill permitting program. And this creates confusion and potential inefficiency of government if the EPA must then review the same material to come to either the same or a new determination for another program under the Clean Water Act, such as the 402 NPDES permitting program. It would seem that the federal agencies could coordinate on that and make sure that determination made by one would apply to the other. Secondly, just does not make sense to me personally as to why there's a 5-year expiration and then a required extension process for determinations that are made on projects. This results in an unnecessary regulatory burden, as water courses typically don't change character in a 5-year time frame. And determinations, I think, should stand until a new application revisits the water body and a different determination is made. I think this would facilitate creation of accurate geospatial data sets and maps of jurisdictional waters. Third, I think the best way to provide certainty for all involved is to create maps that depict jurisdiction. I know there are various efforts underway, and I continue to champion that activity. Mapping would also be improved if the agencies, I think, applied a reasonable person effect when documenting project-specific determinations. For example, when a project for a bridge identifies it as being jurisdictional as it crosses a water body, the extent of the determination is typically just that little piece of road where the bridge crosses the water. It seems like the reasonable person would say, well, if the water downstream of that bridge had to be jurisdictional in order for that bridge project to be jurisdictional, then we should be able to draw a line jurisdiction between the project and its downstream jurisdictional water. So, again, mapping is critical to every landowner's understanding of federal jurisdiction, and I think that there are ways that that certain reasonable assessments can be applied in that process. And fourth, I would say that we think the agencies could enhance the co-regulator partnership by providing states with a meaningful role in making these determinations. As has been said many times today, the state staff with the local knowledge are an excellent resource, and the collective human resources that can be brought to bear on a decision will make the process more informed and we think more efficient. Staff have local knowledge of climate, hydrology, legal and land use and water use factors, and information sharing during that process would provide a valuable resource to the feds and help avoid misinterpretations, delays, and unintended consequences. One last note on this topic, many entities simply apply for Army Corps permits instead of seeking jurisdictional determinations. And the Army Corps processes those project applications without making determinations. This is done largely because it's the path of least resistance and the fastest way to get a project moving. And it also provides a bit of CYA to potentially avoid enforcement if a permit's later determined to be necessary, but the project didn't get one. This doesn't seem to be a good use of time either on the project side or the federal 404 and 401 side. And furthermore, if project applications are processed when they're not really over a jurisdictional water and then they're mapped, this could misrepresent the number and locations of waters that should be mapped as jurisdictional. So thank you.
Great. Jennifer, thank you. I do not have, Jamie's in the queue, but I'm going to make a plea for folks to jump into that queue. It's clear that you all have prepared remarkably well for this roundtable. So I find it hard to believe that folks aren't ready to answer this question. So I'm asking folks to hit Alt-Y to jump into the queue. So I've got Jamie, then Amanda, and then other folks.
Yeah, I just wanted to carry forward the idea and the discussion that Jennifer started with the broad jurisdiction, and it does appear in this rule that there is it would be a broad jurisdiction included in the proposed rule, and just point out that it may make it more difficult for farmers and ranchers to actually engage in soil conservation activities. And if you look at the Biden administration's recent focus on climate smart agriculture, it should be pointed out that a broad jurisdiction within this role really will be difficult for farmers and ranchers to continue on all these projects. Farmers and ranchers have more incentive to try to prevent to preserve topsoil in their land, such as where land is at risk of erosion. They may want to engage in mitigation activities. Farmers also often take on projects that include stormwater management, wildlife habitat, flood control, nutrient processing, and improving overall water quality in uplands and ephemeral features. But if a farmer could not do this without applying for a federal permit, it may be cost prohibitive, resulting in environmental degradation and not protection in these programs that have been widely embraced by farmers across the West. And just to point out that, if a jurisdictional determination can take at least 6 months to a year to receive, with a farmer or rancher stuck waiting on a decision in the meantime. And once an affirmative jurisdictional determination occurs, the harm from delay is compounded by the cost of consultants, engineers, permit applications, and mitigation, and the compliance costs that make the process simply untenable for many. And some of them on tight timelines in terms of receiving funding for these projects as well. So just kind of wanted to point out the unintended consequences on other federal programs that farmers are utilizing to make our farms and ranches responsible environmental stewards. So thanks.
Jamie, thank you. Amanda, you're up. Then I've got Greg, then Todd. Amanda, please.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump around a little bit for these questions. So I apologize in advance, but I wanted to really touch on the 3 agencies within the state of Montana that are key in water management and how we cooperate and coordinate together. So our Department of Environmental Quality handles obviously water quality. The Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, which I run, manages for water quantity. And then our Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Department oversees the maintenance of water for fish, wildlife, and recreation purposes. So for the most part, these 3 agencies and their regulatory purview are separate. However, on water-related issues that span our agencies, that includes drought, gauging and measurement, et cetera, our agencies work together in a collaborative fashion. So thinking about that within the context of a project, where you could see a single project that needs permits from DEQ, DNRC, FWP, then Army Corps, the county, or the conservation district, all these agencies have some overlap, but they do different things. And the benefit of the coordination between Montana agencies is that we work to ensure similar messaging, and we really do work in lockstep together. And that's quite a benefit. So when state and federal agencies are able to agree on an effort, we find that they're able to coordinate well. However, if there is any differentiation between state and federal agencies, that daylight is often exploited to the detriment of applicants and processes. So overall, we, in terms of question 3, an option could be drafting a rule that clearly delineates the bounds of their jurisdiction and leaves the rest to the states. That's sort of been the tenor of my comments to date. We really firmly believe that the state is best positioned here And one unique quality that the state does have is that we really are best positioned to work with locals and stakeholders on guiding what is best for Montana. And that is such an important thing for us. One concern we have is, a federal one-size-fits-all approach. That type of approach diverts resources from where we should be focusing them, too much spread, not enough targeting the need. So, we can kind of cater to the needs of our state and really drive at finding solutions with our locals and our stakeholders versus taking a one-size-fits-all approach. Thank you.
Amanda, thank you. Greg, I don't know if you took your hand down because you didn't have additional comments, but Greg, I had you next in the queue. Greg, if you're interested in reflecting on these questions, please jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I just don't want to sound repetitive. I agree with a lot that's been said today. I do have a comment that I'll save until the end. I want to let you get through these questions and let everybody talk about these questions first, because the comment I have doesn't really necessarily directly relate to the question, so I'll hold tight.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Todd, you're up.
I just wanted to echo what was mentioned by Jamie. It's often problematic, challenging for landowners to wade through the permitting process, when participating in farm bill programs or other things like that. I think the new rule and changes to that just make it more difficult, and I think we'll see less landowners willing to participate in farm bill programs and state-like programs that benefit water quality and quantity. So I think we need to keep that in mind. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Todd. So I've got Tammy in the queue, and I don't have anyone else in the queue. We've got about, from my reckoning, about 10 minutes left. And so, what I want to do at this point after Tammy is I want to invite folks, since we aren't going to go all the way around the horn again at the end, if you have final comments or thoughts that you want to share with your colleagues here, your roundtable colleagues and EPA and the Army Corps, to go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll try to make space for that. And so, Greg, that would be your cue to jump in. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I've got Tammy, and then I want to broaden the conversation if folks have other thoughts that they want to share, and or other folks who have not gone to reflect on these questions. I would welcome that. Tammy, please.
Thank you. I'd like to echo the comments made by Director Amanda Castor of Montana's Department of Natural Resource and Conservation. I've been engaged in this business for better than 30 years, and I can unequivocally state that our state agencies work together, as she has said, that we bring in as appropriate our federal partners with both the U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management. We work closely with local watershed groups, our soil and water conservation districts, and it is a system that works, and that's important. The second thing I want to address is, I think Montana and everybody on this call, I think we sort of deserve more than moving target. And for some time now, Waters of the U.S. has been used as a political football, for lack of a better term. It continues to change. Those who want more protection, those who may not enjoy some of the development activities that occur, those who want less. I mean, this moving target is difficult, it's unfair, it's expensive, whether you're talking about federal dollars and staffing, state dollars, et cetera, as we're trying to move through this. And I'm hoping that perhaps the Supreme Court pending decision may help us settle this, but I would really like to see, so how could we more effectively do this? Let's stop moving the ball. Let's settle on something. Let's figure out what really are jurisdictional waters under Waters of the US. Let's quit trying to incorporate things that, even from a ranching perspective, it requires a lot of money for a rancher or a mine or a timber project or whatever else it is we're working on to hire the necessary consultant to try to correctly interpret some of these subjective regulations. And, you know, and some of these involve very complicated and expensive scientific research. I don't think that that's what we're shooting at. We all care about having clean water to not only provide water for our citizens, but for recreation, fisheries, just for the health of our state. That's the goal. But I suppose my concluding remark is, this can't continue to be a moving target.
Tammy, thank you. So I've got Phyllis, Jason, then Greg. Phyllis, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a comment to number 3. Hawaii is in agreement with the others that have spoken for state jurisdiction. You know, states have the local knowledge and expertise to determine how to best protect water resources and what works in, you know, their jurisdiction. Hawaii already has very stringent laws and regulations to address water protection. And a concern would be regarding, you know, in our wetlands, some of our wetlands that are natural, wild, or those that are used for agricultural production. You know, we do have crops that are very significant culturally and also a very important staple in our diet. And, you know, we do work well with the Department of Health in our state to address the use of aquaculture in wetlands. And just want to say that, you know, we don't want any kind of unintended consequences to have a negative impact on our food security. Thank you.
Great, Phyllis, thank you. Next, I've got Jason, and then following Jason, I've got you, Greg.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to listen and interact with people, peers across the Western United States, that many of us are facing those same challenges. But again, just reiterate some of the comments, really the last couple people that have said some things. I think it's important that we allow the states to have that jurisdiction. Particularly, you know, here in the state of Idaho, we've been very creative. It never fails to impress me how when humans are faced with a challenge, how creative they can be to solve problems, particularly with water quality. Here in Southern Idaho, we've partnershiped with municipalities, have partnership with agriculture entities to improve water quality, water quantity. And I think a lot of that would be stymied if we had too much overreach from the federal level. I really believe that the states are capable of handling these types of issues. I would like to say again, I think the comment from of mapping, understanding where these waters, delineating these waters and where that jurisdictional boundary, getting some clarity for the end user and letting those end users go to work and be creative on solutions. And again, echo, you know, it's hard to hit a target if that keeps moving, or the fear of, if I implement a project, a water quality project, it may not be regulated under this cycle, but who knows, in another couple of years it may be regulated, in the back and forth and in the ping-ponging effect. But also, I think Katie had mentioned here in the state of Idaho, we do an extensive amount of aquifer recharge, and really believe that's an effective way, and want to make sure that that continues to be allowed in the state of Idaho. And obviously the Maui case is something we're looking at. But again, thank you for this opportunity. Hopefully we can continue or solidify some rules so that we can continue to move forward as professionals and as states and have that ability to be effective.
Great. Jason, thank you. So I've got Greg left in the queue, and then we probably have time for one or two more comments. And so after Greg, I'll see if anyone else has put their hand up. If no one else has put their hand up, Jamie, I'm then going to come to you for closing remarks, and then Sylvia, I'll come to you, and then Stacy after that. So I've got Greg, and it looks like I've got Amanda, and then I probably have time for one more person before I come to Jamie. So Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. A couple of things. I am going to reiterate all the comments that have been made today with regard to overlap on regulations. So between Army Corps and EPA and the state of California, and I'm speaking specifically for the state of California here, we've got California Environmental Quality Act regulations. We've got independent agency regulations like Department of Safety of Dams that are all, the state of California prides itself, and not in a good way necessarily, on being much more stringent than a lot of the federal regulations. And that does have some benefit, but most times it doesn't have a whole lot of benefit, especially for an agency like mine. And I think I have a kind of a unique perspective on this panel today because it's, and I'm not familiar with everybody here, but based on what I've heard today, I'm kind of where the rubber meets the road when it comes to regulations. The water and sewer service that I provide to people every day, everybody on this call, when you open your tap or you flush your toilet, you're the person that these regulations ultimately are going to directly impact. Yes, they impact us and our ability to operate, but at the end of the day, it's going to increase cost. And that cost, by law, as a public agency, I can pass those costs down, and I have to pass those costs down to the end user, you guys, the customer. And to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, we did a study here within our agency, and remember, we're 100 square miles, 150,000, almost 160,000 people in our service area. Well over 34% of our costs during the day are simply to adhere to regulations. Not the cost of electricity, not the cost of the actual water, but 34% of the costs that we're dealing with and passing on to our customers every day, 34% of that cost. So I really hope, and I've watched some of the other roundtables that the agencies have put together over the last several weeks. And I really, really hope that both agencies seriously consider and implement the recommendations and suggestions that have been made here today and in other panels, because the EPA, Army Corps, we're telling you how these proposed rules and the rules that are already in place impact real people every day. And the cost of service continues to go up. And the one thing we really haven't hit on today, the young woman from Oregon touched on it a little bit from an environmental justice standpoint, are the disadvantaged communities. So you have 34% of our operational costs are simply due to regulation. And it hits all of us, especially with the way the economy is right now. It's tough to begin with, let alone these disadvantaged communities or severely disadvantaged communities that are struggling to pay for food and water, the necessities of life, that they've reserved themselves, or I can't think of the word, basically what I call backyard agriculture. Our customers are planting gardens in the backyards to offset the cost of food. And then we have to continue to raise the rates on water. Then all of a sudden that water is going to be so expensive because of these regulations. They're going to lose that backyard agriculture and severely impact their quality of life. So I really appreciate everybody's comments today. I applaud everybody on this panel. You all have brought an amazing perspective to the agencies today, and I really hope they take this to heart in everything that they've heard on previous panels as well. So I'm honored that the Farm Bureau included us on this panel. I'm thankful that they included us on this panel. Everybody had a lot of good things to say today, and I agree with probably 95% of what was said today on this roundtable. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and provide input and perspective. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. So Amanda, you're going to have the last word here, and then I'm going to come to you, Jamie. Amanda, I asked that maybe under 2 minutes.
Oh, yes, I'll keep it brief. I want to echo the closing remarks here, just in terms of, I really appreciate the conversation and the dialogue. I did just want to say, I thought I heard in the very beginning that our comments today would not be considered as part of the agency's consideration of the rule. And that's a bit disappointing if that is in fact the case, as it's our understanding that these conversations were really to advise the federal agencies in pulling together a rule. So again, I hope that was, that I misheard that, or I really do hope that you're taking what each of us have offered today into consideration as you take this into broader consideration as you work on a WOTUS rule. I think we've offered some really important perspectives here, and clearly we all have very unique perspectives that deserve consideration. Thank you.
Great. Amanda, thank you. Okay, I am now going to come to you, Jamie, and to offer closing remarks from the organizer's perspective, and then Sylvia and Stacy, I'll come to you next. So Jamie, please.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to everyone on this panel. I agree with the previous comment by Greg that, agreeing with just about 90% of what everyone has said here from very thoughtful perspectives. And I think, the biggest takeaway is this. What constitutes waters of the U.S. has been a subject of great political and legal debate for more than 4 decades, multiple presidents, yet here we are again. However, we all agreed having a clear, well-defined standard is what constitutes waters of the U.S., as well as a clear understanding as to the way the waters of the U.S. is implemented continues to shift. 2015 rule resulted in immediate litigation across the nation and led to inconsistent application across the nation's waterways. The 2020 National Waters Protection Rule narrowed the 2015 Waters of the U.S. rule to mixed reception. The result has been contentiousness, confusing regulatory schemes across the West. For Western communities where clean water is the lifeblood for both urban and rural areas, this regulatory pendulum has created uncertainties surrounding the federal regulatory regime. We appreciate the agency's commitment to learning from past regulatory approaches and engaging with us, the stakeholders, and our members in our respective groups. We share the agency's desire to clarify the longstanding confusion over the definition of the waters of the U.S. and achieve a durable definition of the waters of the U.S. We hope that today's roundtable has provided Western insights and perspectives on the current WOTUS proposed rule. So thank you to everyone at the agencies, and thank you to everyone who participated today in the roundtable.
Sylvia? Oh, Sylvia, can't hear you.
I've been so focused on listening that I wasn't focused on unmuting myself. So my apologies to everybody. My name's Sylvia Quast. I'm a senior advisor to the Assistant Administrator for Water here at EPA, Radhika Fox. And I just have to say I've really enjoyed all these roundtables, and I particularly enjoyed this roundtable because my normal job with the agency is to be the regional counsel for EPA Region 9 out here in California, Nevada, Arizona, Hawaii, and all the Pacific Islands. It's been terrific to hear from all of you and to hear about your perspectives on the West. And some of you may question my credentials as a Californian to say that I'm from the West, but I've been around all of the West, and it's an amazing part of the United States. And it's really important to get your input on what we need to be thinking about in terms of moving forward. Special shout out to you, Jamie, and to your colleagues there at California Farm Bureau for putting this roundtable together. You did a terrific job in pulling together this great group of people who've obviously put a lot of time and a lot of thought into these issues. And that's just so appreciated. And it's all of you on the roundtable. Thank you so much for all your effort and time. And thank you very much for your specific suggestions for us. That's very much appreciated. You've given us a lot to think about here. Amanda, I just want to say in response to the question that you had, what Novice was saying to start with was just that we can't take in any new information because the public comment period closed on the proposed rulemaking that's out there, but this information will be considered in any subsequent rulemakings. But it was just a question of new information and the public comment period being closed. So that's what that was about. And my sense is that a lot of the things that folks were saying today were folks that they've already said in comments they've submitted during the public comment period. So I hope that's helpful to you to understand how this is going to be used. Let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to mention here. We are out of time. Last thing I wanted to say, thank you so much, Rob and Janelle, for your great work in facilitating these roundtables. You've been doing a terrific job in making sure that everybody gets a chance to have their voice heard. Very much appreciated. Stacy, let me just turn it over to you, see if you have anything that you want to add in closing.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. And I know, yes, we are. This one, certainly so many good things to hear. We've definitely run up against the clock here, so I'll be brief. I just want to echo everything you said and just thank you on behalf of Secretary Connor and Deputy Pinkham. So, you know, it's always good for us to hear from all the perspectives, and this roundtable does that. Very informative. And really that other key piece, you know, Sylvia, of how we can use this is in implementation. And from the Army's perspective, you know, that clear and consistent implementation is really what drives us. So that the insights we heard today will be very helpful regarding that. So thank you very much for joining us today, and have a good night.
Thank you, everybody. Meeting adjourned. I appreciate your time. Take it easy.
Thank you.
Thank you.